I've been known by many names. Some know me as Dorky's Alt. You know, I've been called that before, considering my tanking skills are really S tier. But tanks are going into the gutter. Now, when I first voiced my concerns about the tanking changes, a lot of people said, oh, tanks aren't supposed to be invincible. These changes are correct. Don't worry about it. Well, now that these changes are being tested, a lot of people happen to be voicing the same concerns that Samiccus voiced it all those months ago, right? And that is, this sucks for tanks. This is going to be a complete and utter shit show. I'm not excited about it. I'm very much worried about it. It's going to put so much pressure on healers, it's ridiculous. And basically, tanks are not going to be able to do much other than hold aggro. Besides that, they're going to be just as killable as everyone else almost. So let's check out this video by my friend Dorky, the state of all 6 tanks, the War Within beta. Let's see how good or bad things are looking.
Pre-patch is finally out, and classes are probably not seeing any more reworks. It'll just likely be number tuning from here. So I've been playing all the tanks, and this video will cover my thoughts on all of them. Blood Death Knight has been the most reworked and different feeling tank in the War Within.
Oh god, I'm worried.
It's been pretty fun to play with the addition of Bone Storm and Exterminate. Personally, I don't like how bloated the opener feels, especially with Deathbringer. You have to go into a poll, drop your D&D, put up Dancing Rune Weapon, put Tombstone and Bone Storm on cooldown, get Reaper's Mark rolling, and then you can finally start playing the game. Deathstrike changes were well needed in my opinion for a healthier Blood Decay gameplay, but it does lead to a couple of problematic interactions. One is the double Deathstrike scenario. When one Deathstrike isn't enough to bring your health to a threshold that lets you survive the incoming attack, you would normally hit a second Deathstrike, but this second Deathstrike is now insufficient healing. It's a rare scenario in most...
yeah, they nerfed the second Deathstrike, so they're nerfing healing across the board essentially for tanks, and that will really affect Blood Decays the most because healing is what they did. And they're taking that away. So you can't double Deathstrike anymore, you can't overheal anymore, it's basically Deathstrike at the right time or die.
M+ scenarios, but it was once a natural way of playing and is now heavily punished. The second is using Deathstrike strictly to not overcap your runic power, which can lead to smaller subsequent Deathstrike healing. Overall, this nerf shouldn't affect DK's survivability as much as it seems. It is looking to be one of the strongest tanks currently. The Deathbringer tree is currently the stronger hero talent even after nerfs, and it's super satisfying to hit those Exterminate scythes. And Blood Decay is doing some of the highest overall damage right now, but it doesn't provide a raid buff the same way some of the other tanks do.
That's a shocker, we're doing damage in this expansion? That's not bad.
So survives extremely well, especially with how much more reliant other tanks are on healers now in War Within. This will be by far the biggest appeal to playing Blood Decay N+, which is kind of what it was like before. It's just the self-sustained tank, but it will require a little bit of healing in certain scenarios, like the ones where I've mentioned you can't necessarily top yourself with a single Deathstrike anymore. Right now, on beta, Blood Decay definitely feels like a contender for the top tank spot with how strong their defensives are and how powerful they are offensively, but I don't know how well this leads into the very highest keys when the game goes live.
Probably not well.
Generally, Blood Decay falls off as you go into higher keys because of how much more susceptible they are to getting killed from 100 to 0 before you can Deathstrike, with larger pulls and infinitely scaled mobs. Before the tank nerfs, Blood Shield was a way for Blood Decay to have a higher effective HP pool, but the nerfs to Deathstrike and the nerfs to Blood Shield heavily impact that part of Blood Decay, and it does make them a lot more vulnerable in these situations where you don't have as much effective HP to stay alive.
See, we used to offset vulnerabilities with like double Deathstriking, which is not going to be a thing anymore. You're just going to have to know the fights better, I guess. You're going to really have to know abilities, and another thing that's going to be put on healers is they're going to have to know abilities. If there's a big tank buster ability coming, healers are going to have to know how to time that, right? Because that knowledge used to just be required by the tank because they could just damage mitigate through it properly, and you won't be able to anymore. You're going to need the healer to heal you through it too. So like I said, I mean, you know, we already don't have enough healers in this game, and now healing is going to be that much harder, unfortunately.
Tried Blood Decay in some of the higher keys on beta, and it was starting to get to that point, but it's very hard to gauge off of beta dungeons. On beta, we're basically playing full YOLO as if it was a pug, so we don't actually get to see the fullest potential of what we can do in M+. Either way, it is going to be an insane tank for at least close to the highest keys, if not the highest keys, and probably the best tank to play when pugging, since you're not as reliant on the healer or your group to be doing everything to keep the tank alive. The tank I've been playing the most on beta is Bear Tank. Elun's Chosen is currently the better choice for the M plus hero talent, and it's not actually even close. It plays very much the same as Old Bear, where you just mash your buttons, except you do have Lunar Beam now, which is a powerful cooldown offensively and defensively on a pretty short cooldown. Even though it's super simple to play, I've actually been really enjoying Elun's Chosen and doing extremely well with it. I know some of you guys hate Bear Tank for how boring and simple it can be, but for a lot of us
Just
Bear
swiping
enjoyers out
everything.
there is something cathartic about just mashing the same few buttons over and over. I do feel like when I'm playing tank, or Bear Tank specifically, I can focus more on...
Is it me, or is bear tanking the most brain dead version of tanking? I'm not calling them out. I'm just saying, like, this is what I hear all the time, is that, oh yeah, they're just swiping everything over and over and over. Whereas Blood DK's got like 15 pages of openers to get off before they can actually start tanking properly.
the game rather than staring at my UI and figuring out how to manage all my defensives and mitigation and optimizing my damage rotation. The tank nerfs do make Bear require a bit more healing here and there, but Bear is still largely self-sustainable. Bear has a lot of strong defensive cooldowns, allowing them to survive super large and dangerous pulls, and occasional large tank busters. Bark Skin is now a 30% DR, and with reinforced fur, it actually goes up to 40%, which is kind of ridiculous for something that lasts for so long and has such a short CD. The only weakness Bear has right now is outside of their defensive cooldowns, they are a bit squishier than normal. Bear used to sustain with UFR, Frenzy Regen, Elun's Favor.
Yeah, more squishy than normal is a common theme, I think, based on all these, all the changes Blizzard made. That's what they want. They want us to be more squishy than normal.
And various other passives that have all been heavily nerfed. I've been messing around with both Incarn and no Incarn builds, and so far I've been leaning towards Incarn. Bear damage is really high at the moment with Elun's Chosen, and more importantly, it brings Mark of the Wild. We've seen raid buffs play a large role in Dragonflight, especially ones as powerful as Mark of the Wild, and currently all the other druid specs kinda suck. I'm leaning towards Bear being the strongest overall tank for the highest keys in M+, but not by much. It doesn't feel quite as good as Blood Decay in some of these YOLO keys where you don't know who you're playing with. You don't know if you have like a healer that can be reliable in the group. Maybe you're not playing with an augmentation evoker. But in the higher keys, it does feel more reliable than Blood Decay, and it does provide group buffs like Mark Wild and other druid utility. And the druid dispel this season is actually really big with these season 1 dungeons.
Okay.
One of my favorite tanks to play.
Yeah, I'm sure having a druid dispel is nice. I mean, blood DKs are not going to be able to help out with that. And I already feel like I said, healers are going to have to be able to dispel and understand mechanics good enough to know when they got to really pump up the healing on the tank. So, I mean, you're just adding... There's just so much more on healers now, and I don't understand why that's been a goal for Blizzard to do, because already I feel like we lack in healers so much.
At the moment on beta is Brewmaster. Brew actually feels insanely good, probably the best it's felt in forever, and it's actually really fun to play.
Yeah, but is that saying much? Brewmaster was in such a bad spot for a while, wasn't it? I mean, I'm glad that they're in a better spot now, but man, I thought Brewmaster was in the gutter for a little while.
It still has just as many buttons as before, but the opener is much simpler and quicker. Basically the opposite of what has happened with Blood Decay. Before, you had to drop your White Tiger statue, keep rushing Jadewind up, use Weapons of Order, Bone Dust Brew, Exploding Keg, then you can finally play the game. Now it's just Weapons of Order and Exploding Keg and just go ham. There's no need to play Rushing Jadewind or New Zao, which reduces some buttons. Bone Dust Brew and Statue are gone, and it's a lot smoother to play. Both hero talents seem good, and the new talent Ox Stance helps a lot in a lot of large tank buster situations. Ox Stance basically gives you a ton of stagger against large hits, which was a weakness of Brew when you didn't have enough defensive cooldowns to deal with certain tank buster mechanics. This is probably the tank that got affected the least, but as usual, Brew does soak up a ton of healing, making it extremely powerful with a lot of external healing and augmentation evoker. Brew damage is right up there with Bear and Blood Decay, and it does give Mystic Touch, but Mystic Touch is much weaker of a raid buff because of how little physical damage classes do nowadays. Even your typical melees like Frost Decay or Red Paladin or Enhancement Shaman, they all do largely magical damage. It's a lot less popular of a tank, so we probably won't see it being played as much.
Yeah, I feel like I never
do
see
think
him.
this is the best Brew has been, and it'll likely keep up in the highest keys with other tanks.
I feel like most of the time my co-tanks are other blood DKs, paladins, obviously. They're constantly seeing protection paladins co-tank with me, and then warriors. I feel like I never see monk tanks. Never.
In some scenarios, I actually do find Brew to be the strongest. When it comes to tanking bosses with a ton of dangerous tank busters, Brew feels amazing. With a ton of healing and augmentation evoker, Brew feels almost unkillable. It's not as self-sufficient as Bear or Blood Decay, making it feel worse in the YOLO Pug scenarios, but don't let this stop you from playing the awesome tank that is Brewmaster. Vengeance Demon Hunter dominated for a good later half of Dragonflight, and people have been fed up with this tank being meta for so long. Well, don't worry, because Demon Hunter is now dead and gone. I'm just kidding, but Vengeance is not that bad after a couple of buffs recently. Right now, it's definitely a shadow of its former self, making it feel pretty bad.
I mean, Jesus, it was like the only choice for high-end mythic keys for the longest time. I think it's okay if they got nerfed a little bit. It was like literally Vengeance Demon Hunter was like S++ tier, and then the next thing was A tier for like Ret Pallies or something. It was ridiculous how much better they were.
And Luminous Angels carried VDH.
And then they just have the speed. Like, they are just so fast. No other tank can keep up with them. So, like, just speed running through a Mythic Plus. I mean, if you have a Vengeance tank, I mean, you just were going to go slower, naturally.
For its duration in Dragonflight, and it's now gone, making the Sigil build dead. Well, Illuminated Sigil is not gone, but it is heavily nerfed. Right now,
maybe I'm just saying that because I've always been jealous of Demon Hunters as a Blood DK. I just feel like they're everything that we're not. Yeah.
Feels like older versions of Demon Hunter with the double brand build, just a lot weaker. Silent Sigil was a 60-second cooldown and 6-second duration, but it's now 90-second cooldown and a 4-second duration. Despite the large nerfs, Demon Hunter is still a solid tank. Currently, Felsguard feels like the stronger hero talent for M+. It's been both fun, but also feels bad to play with. It essentially turns meta into a powerful offensive cooldown, which is currently your biggest defensive cooldown. When you use it for damage, it feels really good because of how hard you can burst, but there will be scenarios where you will want to hold it defensively, and you are losing out on a ton of damage when you do that. For the longest time, I never had to worry about putting meta on cooldown, and I always had it as a defensive to fill in the defensive gaps, but now it's an actual DPS loss if you're missing a use of meta. Overall, Demon Hunter looks like it will still be a strong tank that brings high damage to the group. It does very slightly less than the other tanks mentioned, but it does bring Chaos Brand, and that has insane value in the caster meta. Demon Hunter,
and as I said, it just brings speed, man. They are so mobile, so nimble. I mean, they just naturally can do a run quicker. Even if everything is done perfectly by another tank, they're just so fast.
Utility is also nowhere near as good as it was before, especially with how they reworked M+ mobs to recast, so just using one of your many stops won't do a lot compared to Dragonflight. VDH is also a bit squishy in some scenarios, and definitely promotes a kiting playstyle when doing hierarchies and bigger polls. It kind of reminds me of Season 1 of Shadowlands playing this tank. On bosses, it's still pretty powerful with the Frailty build, but it has been nerfed quite heavily, making it require a bit of healing to stay topped when Soul and Leech healing isn't enough. Prop Paladin has been the most doomed on tank for most of the beta cycle. There's been a lot of complaints about how poorly Prop Paladin is doing. Personally, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, especially after the most recent set of buffs. Paladin's definitely feeling worse than before, and it has been affected heavily by the tank nerfs, but honestly, all the tanks don't feel that great, and it's just sort of how Blizzard wants tanks to be designed. I haven't messed too much with the Templar hero talent tree, but for the brief moment I played it, it was extremely clunky due to the high holy power cost and the low holy power economy currently. Lightsmith plays exactly the same as usual, except now you have an extra button and just adds a little bit of damage, or shield that you can put on an ally. And Lightsmith does seem a little bit overtuned at the moment, so I wouldn't be surprised if it receives some nerfs to be more in line with Templar. Paladin still offers a ton of great utility, especially with the M+ changes that made interrupts more valuable than stops. The Avenger Shield interrupts are actually huge to have once again, but the spec does...
like if he's saying Paladin is I feel like Paladin usually gets course corrected pretty quickly. I don't know if that's because Blizzard sees a lot of people playing Paladin, so they get more feedback, but I feel like they'll let monks like writhe around in the dirt for like months at a time before they do anything. Paladins are usually quick to action with. And like I said, it might be because they get more feedback on Paladins because there's just such a big player base of Paladins as compared to monks. But it sounds like they're not in a horrible spot. They're just not in the best spot that they've been. And they were in a great spot, I have to say, towards the end of Dragonflight.
They'll feel a little bit weak defensively. I've found Paladin to be extremely reliant on the healer to stay alive, but it is capable of surviving, especially with its large array of defensive cooldowns. It's a bit awkward because on one hand, Paladins are completely fine as long as you have an augmentation evoker and sufficient healing, but on the other hand, this crutch feels really bad, which is part of why a lot of Paladins are dooming so heavily. Paladin damage is also extremely good at the moment. I was very surprised by the numbers this spec can put up, and it might actually be the highest damage tank in AoE heavy dungeons. I can see Paladin being quite good in hierarchies with a good group, but it might struggle when pugging. Some dungeons also stink real bad for Paladin with the amount of movement.
It sounds like Paladin's going to need a good healer and some good damage around him. He said it does the most damage, but it sounds like they'll be a bit more healer dependent. So yeah, that makes it worse for pugging.
Required, making consecration
My
really
God, look at all
awkward
the
to play
stuff on the
around.
screen.
Overall, I'm pretty content with Prop Paladin. It's been kind of enjoyable here and there. It just needs some help with self-sustain and a little bit more holy power generation. Pro Warrior has been a great tank to play for most of the beta cycle. I've really enjoyed how it plays with Mountain Fane hero talent. The whole Thunderclap playstyle of Mountain Fane reminds me of BFA Pro Warrior, where you're just spamming Thunderclap, you have pretty high rage generation, and you're getting your avatars back up. So you're just going through that whole gameplay loop of cycling through all your cooldowns and Thunderclapping. I haven't bothered too much with Colossus since Mountain Fane is just much better for M+. Right now, Warrior...
So is that like their ability now? They basically, spam Thunder Cheek Clap over and over? That actually sounds like a fun way to play Warrior.
Feels good in dungeons until you run to encounters that have nasty dot damage or constant magic damage. These dungeons do have a lot of those rough encounters for Warrior, making it not as reliable in hierarchies. I've noticed a couple of areas where Spell Reflect is also very powerful. Warrior self-sustain is also at an all-time low and will probably heavily rely on the healer to stay alive.
Sounds like anti-magic shell will be a big thing. Is this guy playing in crab mode, or is there actually a giant crab boss in one of the dungeons? Is he using the crab filter, I wonder?
Fully, in most scenarios, Warrior actually takes quite little damage, making it pretty easy to get topped. Warrior damage is also a bit on the lower end compared to other tanks, but not by much. Overall, I would say Warrior's been really enjoyable to play and performs about average. It's the tank with the biggest strengths and weaknesses. To summarize everything, I've enjoyed most of the tanks. My favorite in terms of fun has just been depending on how I'm feeling. When I'm feeling something chill, Bear's been the most fun for that. When I want something more engaging, Blood DK and Brewmaster are the two most fun. Demon Hunter and Paladin haven't been as enjoyable for me, just because they've been playing like their Dragonflight versions, except it's weaker, clunkier, and less resource generation.
Yeah,
Warriors are fun
that was Blizzard's goal, right? Weaker and clunkier, that's what they wanted tanks to be.
To play too, but it does get old, and I really don't like the reliance on healing. If I were to say who the winners are, Bear is probably looking to be the most solid overall for the highest level content. Blood DK is probably going to be the best for the medium to high level range, especially in uncoordinated groups. Brew, Paladin, and VDH are the sleeper specs, with the highest potential to be the best depending on how you and your group plays. I think VDH in particular might be really strong just because of Chaos Brand and Caster meta. In a Caster comp, VDH with Brand factored in can be doing around 1 million damage overall, which is way more than any other tanks aside from maybe Bear tank with Market Wild. Most of the tanks are doing anywhere from like 600 to 700k overall damage. Warriors, I definitely don't feel great about, but that's not to say it's bad. It's just ever so slightly behind the rest of the tanks, and it'll still feel completely fine, if not great to play. I honestly don't think most of you guys will feel like you're missing out by playing a Warrior. As for what I'm playing, I'm probably planning on leveling all the tanks for Warfin. I'll probably pick something based on what I want to raid to as well, since I'm playing DPS and raid. So it'll probably be like DK or Druid. But I do want to keep up all the tanks, if I'm able to. Anyways, that is it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll start pumping out more YouTube content while beta is going through rapid changes. But in the meantime, tune into my Twitch live stream if you guys have any questions.
Not bad. Not a bad video. I mean, as Dorky's official alt/unofficial, I think it was a fairly accurate. You know, Blood DK being the best in terms of pugging, I think Blizzard did that because they watch my streams, they know what I do, and they know I only play Blood DK, so of course they're going to go that direction. But a nice video from Dorky. I actually have not subbed to him. Oh man, I got to get that fixed. Yeah, and it looks like tanking overall is going to take, that turn towards the squishy a little bit, right? That's what Blizzard wants to happen. They want healers to be more relevant for God knows for what reason. I mean, we already have no healers playing this game, but it is what it is. So that's how it's gonna look. Blood DK, not bad. DH looks like it's taking a bit of a hit. Prot Pally seems like you have to be skilled. Same with Warrior to be able to pull it off. But overall, tanking is gonna be, it's gonna take some getting used to in the War Within. That's for sure.